The Pirate Book by Mickey Davidson. And this is a book with a number of stories by pirates. And today we're going to read the story called The Pirate Who Could Not Swim. Bartholomew Portuguese was a very successful pirate. His ship was packed with pirate treasure, for he won fight after fight. But one day his luck changed. He fought and lost, and so Bartholomew Portuguese was captured. He was taken to the nearest town because Bartholomew Portuguese was a very fierce pirate. The townspeople decided he must die. They would hang him in the morning. The people left Bartholomew locked up in the ship, and they started to build a gallows in the town square. Soon Bartholomew learned that he was to die in the morning. He must escape, he decided. But how could he get away? Somebody would come and look in on him before morning. He would hit that man over the head and make a dash for freedom. But then what? How would he get off the ship? Bartholomew Portuguese could not swim. He looked around the room, and he saw an earthen wine jar, a big jar. Nearby was an old animal skin. Perfect. Bartholomew made a life preserver by tying the skin over the top of the jar. Now he would float to freedom. Late that night, when a sailor came to look in on Bartholomew, the pirate hit him over the head. Then, as quietly as possible, Bartholomew crept up on deck. He threw his jar into the water. Then he jumped in too, and holding onto the jar, Bartholomew paddled ashore. Then he ran along the beach until he came to the jungle, and there he hid himself. Well, Bartholomew Portuguese's adventures had only begun, for it was morning now, and the townspeople knew he had escaped. They came looking for him, and they brought hunting dogs with them. While the men hunted for Bartholomew with their eyes, the dogs hunted with their noses. But Bartholomew was well hidden. He had curled up in a hollow old tree, and he stayed there for 3 days, and finally the people gave up. Bartholomew crept out of his hiding hole. Bartholomew knew where he was going. He was going to a pirate town on the other side of the jungle. There he would be safe, but first he would have to travel for 150 miles through the jungle. That would be like going to the lake and back, and to the lake and back again. He had no gun or knife to use in hunting. All he had to eat were roots and the fruit that grew on trees. And for a long time he found no water, but he kept going. And then he came to a stream. It wasn't very deep. Bartholomew could wade across, but the water was full of alligators. So the pirate picked up some rocks and threw them into the water. This frightened the alligators, and they swam away. Before they came back, Bartholomew was across. The jungle was a scary place, full of animals that screeched and roared. Wild animals came and glared at Bartholomew, but he pushed on. Then he ran into more trouble. He came to a big, deep river. Bartholomew had no wine jar now, so he couldn't float across, and the river was full of alligators. Just then, an old board came floating down the river. It had a big rusty nail in it. Bartholomew saw the nail and knew he was saved. He would make a tool out of that nail. He grabbed the board and pulled the nail out. Then he sharpened it on a rock. With that one nail, Bartholomew dug into the small trees that grew at the river's edge, and slowly, he cut down some of the trees. He put the trees side by side and tied them together with vines. And that is how Bartholomew made a raft. The alligators snapped and snapped, but they couldn't reach Bartholomew on his raft. He sailed across the river and landed on the other side. Now, Bartholomew thought, my troubles must be over, but they weren't. For in front of him was a mangrove swamp. The mangrove trees grew close together, and the roots were all tangled on the muddy ground. Bartholomew put his foot down on the mud. He he began to sink. Quickly, he pulled his foot back. He tossed the stick onto the muddy ground, and slowly it began to sink. Soon it was gone, down in the mud. No man could walk through that. There was only one thing to do, and Bartholomew didn't hesitate. He put his arms around the trunk of the nearest mangrove tree and climbed upward. Then he crawled out onto a branch. He would have to jump to the next tree. Bartholomew looked down at the mud. One slip and he would be dead. But again, he didn't hesitate. He leaped through the air and grabbed onto the branch of the next tree. Swinging from tree to tree, Bartholomew moved through the mangrove swamp like a monkey. At night, he slept in a tree. He had no food or water, and always, always there was the mud below waiting for him. But Bartholomew never slipped. 3 days later, he reached the end of the swamp. He climbed down and stood on solid ground again. Soon Bartholomew came to the pirate town. He ate a good meal. Then he asked his pirate friends for a new ship. The very next day, Bartholomew sailed away. Bartholomew Portuguese went a-pirating again. And that is the end of that little story in the pirate book.